Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, your home for all content Lord of the Rings home. Today, we have the second episode of the Boons and Banes podcast, and of course, it is me with my host, my co-host, TormDK. Torm, what's going on?
Hello everyone, hope you all are doing well. I just got an upgrade apparently. I'm a co-host. That's very nice.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think these are pretty good podcasts, and I think people want to see them. So I think we should probably we're not going to do something like every week, but on a regular basis, when we feel like there's been a big, set of updates, we can kind of do a state of the game and talk about all the details.
Yes, certainly. Sounds good to me.
So for today's sort of agenda, we wanted to talk about a bunch of different things that include the raids, star stat changes, character farming cadences, when Elrond's planning on returning, plus the next legendary, what that means for the game, and then monetization, specifically around character releases, and then kind of an overall state of the game. What are we thinking about the game? What are our future directions on our accounts? How do we feel about the game currently? What are some changes we want to see? And kind of whether this game is dying or not, which seems to be the eternal question we have so far. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about, we'll start with the raids first, and I'll include timestamps down below. And I have some footage that I'm going to play in the background. But Torm, how do you feel about the raids so far, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2?
Yeah, so I'm I guess, a little unlucky in that we trusted what we were told, so we didn't get to try Chapter 2. But Chapter 1, I would say, I think my opinion on that it's quite public, and I would say maybe a little bit negative in that the RNG element kills a lot of the fun for me. In the raid itself. I like the general structure of it. I wouldn't mind it being a daily thing, actually, because that's what we did in Marvel Strike Force. But the RNG needs to be toned a little, I think, at least for Chapter 1.
Yeah, I think the RNG is something that people have been talking about quite a bit. For people who don't know, it's basically the RNG on the bomber, whether he's going to throw it or whether he's going to drop it. It doesn't feel like it's 10% per stack sometimes. And I know people have started collecting data on this, actually. So I think we just have to wait a little bit longer and people will have a sufficient amount of kind of runs to give us whether that's actually true or not. They never really tell us where the probability starts, whether I don't think they do, whether it starts at 0 or not. And so kind of one of my crackpot theories is actually just if you are below the recommended power, then the bomber has like a lower probability chance that you start at. But, it doesn't feel good for a lot of people, like you said, because of this RNG element. It doesn't feel as strategic as people would want. I feel when I have a team that is over the recommended power but can't go to the next difficulty up, it's a lot more manageable. And, one of the things that I will talk about is Chapter 2 is not as RNG dependent, but so far it seems like you get a lot less points. And I think the reason for that is because the variability in points you can get in Chapter 1 is mainly due to the RNG.
Yes, but and this may be true because I did watch yourself and some of the streams you did. I just think that may be a design flaw in a sense. Because if obviously we don't know yet what is the point requirement to go to Chapter 3, right? Because apparently the people that got to Chapter 2 got a semi-bugged version that was already running. But if it's still 17 million, then and the teams we see are doing less per attempt, then I think that's an interesting conundrum. Definitely it is.
Yeah, it is an interesting conundrum because although it takes a lot more time to do Chapter 1, the ceiling is definitely a lot higher. And I do worry about people getting burnt out on that. I think people got burnt out on very quickly in the first place anyway, with the RNG thing. But it does give people who want to do, max pointing, getting max points, a little bit of an opportunity to do so. But I want to talk a little bit about Chapter 2. I did have the opportunity here to kind of play Chapter 2, and I'll show a run from my Rivendell squads. 2 different runs I did. Yeah, let me mute that real quick. And I actually really enjoy Chapter 2. It's got a lot more strategic elements to it. I think there's a lot to be figured out here. Rivendell obviously doing well. I think people feel currently that the Haradrim are underperforming, and I think you've probably been seeing some footage. Is that your take as well?
Well, I haven't really seen that much from Haradrim actually, and I haven't really, as I said, haven't got the chance yet. Mine are I guess, fairly close to being Apex level. I'm still about 2,500 the rare materials short for a full 666 team. But I am looking forward to trying them definitely. I would say that if they are being marketed as a good solution to Chapter 2 and they turn out they are not top of the line, then I think we will maybe have a little different problem for CT at least. So yeah, we're looking forward to Wednesday. I think it is when we will start it up with these new changes.
Yeah, I do think. I think people are still getting a little bit adjusted to the point differential between Chapter 2 and Chapter 1, so maybe that's why they think that the Haradrim are underperforming, or maybe it's just that Haradrim do need specific skills and specific resources put into them before they start to do well. I actually think they're going to perform quite well, just because they have Black Serpent Poison, and then that turns into poison, and it seems that these status effects are actually very, very potent when dealing with the Cave Troll. But overall, I want to say that I'm actually very happy with the Chapter 2 release. I think it's a fun fight. I think there's lots to figure out still. And I think it actually allows for a wider variety of theory crafting and making cool team comps than Chapter 1 does. And so I'm a big fan of that. And I'm overall pretty happy with the raid release in general. I really like the reward structure. I think it's pretty fair, and I think I've talked about this previously, it's not going to open up a big gap between whales and everybody else because they're able to get, to reward box 2 or reward box 3. I think the biggest game biggest guild in the game, or one of the top 3 at least, is able to get that second reward, that second reward box now. And so they've already started getting Gandalf shards,
Yeah, definitely, I agree with that. I would say though that all things being equal, right? I think the top guilds will very very quickly actually get further ahead than the general populace, simply because they can there's a big gap in points needed per guild chest, and if we again, all things being equal, see the same sort of scores in Chapter 3 and 4, then yeah, I think that's probably worth noting, right? The top end guilds are doing like 2.5 times what my guild is doing, right? And my guild is like top 40 in the game right now, according to LOTR. So yeah, I think that is actually maybe a little concerning in the sense that the first couple of boxes are so top heavy. Obviously, they want to account for growth, but that to me also then says, okay, well, if box number 9, as an example, is a year out, then just what sort of power creep are we needing to actually get that far, right? Because we're only on difficulty 3. So yeah, that's going to be interesting.
That's actually a really good point. And I guess I just want to back up a little bit. One of the main reasons I do like that reward structure, though, is specifically the 300k gold throughout all of the guild chests. I think that's a smart move. But to your point, the power creep that we're going to be needed to get to this sort of next level, right? Because yes, even the 2 top players in the game in terms of collection power cannot do difficulty 4 with their strongest teams. What do we need? And I think the answer to that is probably going to be a mod system. If you notice, the jump from 2 to 3, difficulty 2 to 3, is like a 3 times multiplier. So you go from times 3 to times 9, but then difficulty 4 is a times 15 multiplier. So it's not quite a times 3. And I think the recommended power scales sort of accordingly. So I actually think like a mod system or some other form of progression system is probably going to make its way into the game probably at the end of the year here. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say I hope not, and the reason I say that is because I know how mods worked in Star Wars, and I'm not a big fan actually. I much prefer the ISO variant they did in Marvel Strike Force, because that was baseline stats rather than speed. But speed aside, I think it's way too soon actually to do that sort of power creep. Even now that we got the adjusted numbers for 6 and 7 stars, etc., right? The top teams are now, what are they, 57,000 points. So 11k per character or something, right? So And if you look at the recommended for difficulty 4, then again, it's not going to be a small increase that is needed, or at least the score, the point scoring needs to be massively changed then for gear 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah.
Because we've already seen the stats for gear 9, and it doesn't appear to be a big leap. So where's this power going to come from, right? I would be very concerned on that, actually.
Yeah, maybe they want to just keep us here in difficulty 3 for a while. I agree. I would prefer no progression systems for the end of the year. Unfortunately, I do think they're going to put one in, specifically because the whales, not even whales, the Krakens are really kind of chomping at the bit to get to that next level. But we'll see. Hopefully it's not as bad as it could be. But that kind of, you talking about the stat changes from the stars, and Marquees in particular kind of transitions us into our next sort of talking point here, which is basically our first episode was about what are the star stat changes going to do? Are they good or bad? And now we're post that, and we've kind of had a fallout of that. Fallout's maybe a strong word. We've had to play with that for about a month now. So can you give me your overall sort of take on how you think that all ended up?
Well, I don't want to sound too smug, right? But it's almost done exactly like I said it would. So, yeah, I mean, the free-to-play accounts I had was centered around Halberad and Marquee characters, right? So naturally they are basically wasted time now, because you can't pivot anywhere, and yeah, I didn't farm all those characters to begin with. So I think if you were in my situation as a genuine free-to-play player, then there's some tough choices to be made. We said that in the previous podcast. That still remains true. I would say that it even becomes tougher, because now with the raid calendar being out and everyone getting 1.5 million gold, I have some Excel that we'll talk about later on this, but just to preface it, I mean, we've basically been given a sugar rush this month, right? And the sugar rush is about to end, I would say. And when you get the timelines needed to do all these characters, I think there's going to be a wake-up call happening in the community, one way or another, shortly on this. So I would say that now that we played with it, I'm not a big fan. I wasn't a fan to begin with, so obviously I'm biased. I still think this power leap was too large, too soon. But now that it's here, we have to roll with the punch. So that's what I did. I learned my lesson. I guess that's another thing we can talk about in the monetization piece. But yeah, there's some learnings. CG has been kind enough to share us in the form of a slap on the cheek, right? So we'll see how that goes.
Okay, yeah, I think you and I have always had a little bit of a differing opinion on this, and from my perspective, I actually think the star stat changes have been okay. I think they're kind of middle of the road here. I don't think they're great. I don't think they're bad. I have seen some more dedicated free-to-play players kind of rise up in the arena ranks because they're able to, put some resources into their arena team and the focus on that. I do think the Marquees being 3-star, I'm a little bit torn on this because there are difficulties of the raid that are pegged to 3-star characters, basically. I think difficulty 2 is like a 3-star character range. And so if you have a bunch of 3-star Marquee characters and you can slap a team together, then you can do difficulty 2. And that's going to get you most of the way there to getting the 500,000 points you need to go from chapter 1 to chapter 2. And if you get a bunch of difficulty 2 teams, then you're going to be able to get that, start to build up a score. Are you going to be able to get to Gandalf effectively? Probably not. I still think it's better to do it now than later. But when it comes to Marquees, there was kind of this point that was made when all this stuff was happening, was like, well, people are no longer going to be getting 5-star Marquees. And both you and I have spent money to get Marquees to 5 stars after this change came into place. So can you lead me through what you were thinking when you were spending to get to 5 stars, and then I'll talk about why I did it.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's very simple, right? They have been fortunate enough that I wanted the characters to begin with, or otherwise had a purpose for the epic materials. I was actually going to skip Biffer, both because I'm not a dwarf chat, and the second piece is because I don't actually need anything that they give. Well, that turned out to not be true because I noticed my Haradrim leader Tibeb needing 7 epic materials, so I will actually still get Biffer to 5-star this time. But the Marquee after is going to be is probably going to be the first one I don't get. It depends, of course, on what they do, like if they announced, Nazgul and Marquees, or maybe if they did Dun Lending, because I want to actually try the Dun Lending as a team. But other than that, they actually need to start selling me Marquees from a proper sales channel perspective, right? Because I don't need the gold, I don't need the character XP. I probably wouldn't need the epic materials any longer either. So that I think what we said in the previous podcast was 7-star bust. I think that very much becomes true, especially with these updated timelines we now have for Arwen's farmability.
Yeah, so the reason I buy Marquees to 5-star, similar to you, is that I feel like I need the characters, or am interested in buying those characters. So Fellowship and Dwarves, obviously that's what they've been pushing out. I got the Haradrim because I do think the Haradrim are going to be a great team. And I also on my main account, need gold and XP still. I also need those epic ability materials. I kind of want to have some of those banked up. And this is something I want to talk about definitely later in the podcast. But those epic ability materials, right? There's 2 ways to get them: either through the last stage of the Marquee events, or for like 200 mithril raid coins, which nobody is getting at the moment. So it's an incredibly, incredibly rare resource. And so something I think down the line that CG is going to have to deal with is, where can free-to-play players get these ability materials? Because it's not really all that fair if free-to-play, players can't upgrade their Elrond to max leadership ability. But we'll dig into that a little bit more. I'm still okay with the 5-star Marquee sort of situation, because specifically because of raids. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think you have to have 5-star max level to do anything in difficulty 3, but nobody can do difficulty 4 at the moment, even if they have 7-star. And so if you want a team that you think is going to perform well in raids, I think it makes sense to spend on a team that to get them to 5 stars in the Marquees. But that's just personally how I feel about it. And I'm like you, where, I don't want to spend on Marquees anymore unless it's something I'm interested in, or I think it's going to be a really necessary type of character. And unfortunately, all of the ones that have previously come out after the star change are ones I find necessary or have interest in. But this kind of takes us into the next thing we want to talk about here, which is the character farming cadence and time for all of that. So this is a spreadsheet that Torm made, so I'll let him kind of explain what's going on here.
Yes, so I think it's, as all math is, it's somewhat straightforward. Basically, what I did was I asked our good friend Bing Chat, so the ChatGPT, on how many attempts it would take, given the 38% drop chance, to actually get these various star ranks. So basically the idea is you start in the left hand side and pick a star rank that you have for a character, and then you progress to either the green or the red, depending on if you want 5-star timelines or 7-star timelines. I didn't include 6-star. I mean, theoretically we could do that, but this is just to showcase that for like a hard node, if you want to get to 5-star from 0-star, so a brand new character you're just starting, well, it's going to take you roughly 82 days without refreshes. So that is the timeline for 5-star, right? It's not too bad actually, right? And I think for 7-star we mentioned this in the last podcast, right? It's about 213 days. So you can see 5-star is fairly fast. If you do 1 refresh, then you cut the time in half basically, right? If you do 2 refreshes, you're down under a month. So I actually think that is I can understand from some of the other community members that in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, it's very common to do 2 refreshes per Marquee that you're doing. So that's basically the timeline there, right? It would be roughly 40 days or 30 days or so to get this done for Marquee. Not a lot of hocus pocus with it. You can also see for guild energy characters, right? That's also what we talked about last time a little bit. They are still significantly faster, and especially if you start considering refreshes. I think. Basically, every refresh you do in guild energy is basically roughly half a day's worth of free-to-play energy. So if you're a light spender or if you're someone like ourselves, then three refreshes a day for 300 gems is basically 1.5 day extra per day we are getting out of it, right? So we can super farm these guild campaign characters quite easily. And very fast, and then free to play can then roughly do the same, right? It takes them, about 30 days, as we talked about last time, depending on the character. But that then opens up for this opportunity cost thing we talked about last time. I don't want to harp on the gold as much this time. This time it's actually a little bit worse. It's actually the rare ability materials that is the concern, right? Because if you are to the point on timelines, right? If you start the journey today and you just downloaded the game and this is the first podcast you check out, then there's definitely some tough choices to be made on that. Simply because obviously the sooner you get this done, the better for a new player. But it is going to leave your account in a worse state, because you will have no rare ability materials whatsoever, or very few. And that is around level 40. That is what is going to be blocking your progression the most from a character development perspective. So it's a little bit damned if you do, damned if you don't, unfortunately.
Yeah, you have to make a choice, and I think that's actually a good thing to include in these types of games. There's not one right answer. You have to make a hard choice, and I think that you have to kind of live with that choice. And I think that's what makes this game interesting from a free-to-play perspective, is sort of min-maxing in that particular way. But one thing I want to quickly point out for those of you who aren't used to European kind of ways, that the commas here are meant to be decimal places, so just switch them in your head, and it's not 7,9, it's 7.9, right? Just a quick clarification if you don't know about that, but I'm highlighting this 5th row here because I think this is an important one to pay attention to. This is where if you start off at 3 stars, which is what you get for free for all the Marquees, right? And then it's about 60 days on the hard node farm. It's 55, but I'm rounding up to 60. And then to get to 7-star, right, it's 190 days basically to do that. So those are big differences. That is, of course, because it takes less shards to get to 5-star than it does to go from 5-star to 7-star. But one thing I want to point out then is we're going to talk about basically what their release cadence is. So this is a calendar I've just been putting events kind of into so that I can keep track of it myself. We had the Arwen event start on June 1st and on June 7th, and then basically a month later, after her offers expired after the Elrond event, she became gem farmable, meaning that she was put into the premium shop. And then basically a month after that, she's become hard node farmable. And so that's kind of where we have it. There's also a really, really terrific site that just got made by SigSig, who's a member of the community. He's over... they've got their own unofficial Discord server that's really great. You can find it up at the top right here. I'll leave a link to this in the description below, but he's one of the people that's also working with the team that makes LOTR.gg, and this basically tracks all the Marquee events, when they happen, when they go to the premium store, and then when they become farmable. And he's also got stuff coming up, okay, here's where they're going to track all the legendary events as well. So this is going to be an invaluable resource moving into the future. But where do you think, based on the Cadence release for Arwen, which is basically the same as it is for Swigo, when do you think Elrond is going to come back around?
Yeah, so if I look aside my desire as a player and look at the thing why CG made this in the first place, right, to make money, I would say it's going to be next month. And I say this simply because we now have Arwen farmable for the most part. And if they want to monetize these sort of things, and I assume they do because EA's financial quarter ends in September. So I very much assume they will bombard us with offers in September to try and make up for any lost time that may have happened in the past. So I would say probably mid-September is when he would be, maybe the third week of September is probably where he would start. If we assume Elden is going to a node farm, the next update, which I guess would be like the 8th or something of September.
So you think they're gonna put Elodin here this sort of first week of September? They're gonna make him farmable, and then essentially 2 to 3 weeks later, they're going to have the Elrond event.
Yeah, because this puts maximum FOMO on the community. So from a business perspective, I think the chest will return, and people will be buying gems like crazy to try and get this up. That's actually also what they did for Yoda. I can understand in Star Wars back when he was released initially. I've come to understand that at least for modern legendaries that they do in Twigo. It's now either 3 months or 6 months return cadence, but yeah, I think September is a good month if you want to help EA meet their financial quarters.
Yeah. Okay. I hadn't thought about the financial kind of aspect of it. I'm kind of the opinion that at the end of September is probably the soonest, and then that they might do it also in October. We both Torm and I do think that Elrond is probably likely to return. Would you say before the next legendary?
Again, if I put aside my desire as a player and look at the numbers, I think it makes sense, right? Because if we're being honest, what will happen for the most part for the larger community is the free-to-play will potentially get Elrond unlocked, right? So they will have him at 5-star, which is fine for raiding, etc., and maybe even for some parts of arena, depending on your shard. And the whales will probably either have 6 or 7-star, depending on how aggressive they've been doing. I'm only down to missing Lomian, so I just need to get my behind together and refresh him there. So I will have 7-star for that. But then if we look past it, right, I think that's the segue to the Witch King is from an arena perspective. The arena meta is quite stale right now. I would say there's basically 3 variants people use. They all include Elrond. So I think from a monetization perspective, it makes sense to have him announced just after Elrond returns.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me too. So we're in agreement there, both thinking that Elrond will probably return. I do think Elrond's return is going to sort of line up with where if you are free to play, you are going to be able to get a 5-star Elrond by being careful and being able to, or being resourceful and being able to shard farm Arwen every single day. And so to go from 3 to 5 stars, right, that's about 60 days. You might have to do a few node refreshes, definitely a few node refreshes if it's on Torm's timeline, and less so, I think, if it's more on my upper end timeline of maybe 2 months from now. But you're definitely, if you are a spender and you spent on Elrond the first time, I think you're definitely going to have to do node refreshes or have already bought stuff in the premium store to get to a full 7 stars. And I think you're probably going to have to start doing 2 refreshes a day just to get this 131 number down. So you could get the full 7 stars. But like you mentioned, we want to transition into talking a little bit about the Witch King, and specifically this video that APGains put out. And I'll again leave a link to this in the description below. And essentially the premise of the video was the next legendary APGains thinks is going to be the Witch King. It's been data mined that the Haradrim are going to be the unlock requirement for that. I don't know how I feel whether that's going to be the case anymore, but that aside, APGains' sort of thesis for this particular video was that the Witch King needs to be something like Commander Luke Skywalker in Swigo, where he's pretty much always relevant to the meta. And that's actually something that's really, really hard to tune to, because you have to make sure that this character is strong regardless of whatever power creep situation happens in the future. So just what are your thoughts on this particular video and thinking that the Witch King is going to play that sort of role in Lord of the Rings Home?
Yes, so I actually think his thesis is interesting. I was not aware that actually that this Luke Skywalker thing was actually that meta relevant, but I think that from a lore perspective, right? I don't play. So let me first preface say I don't play this game because of the lore, right? I don't actually care that it's Lord of the Rings. I'm just here for the squad collecting game part. But I think a lot of people that are into the lore will sort of feel that the Witch King can't be a one and done thing, right? Because he's apparently immensely powerful in the lore, yada yada, etc. There's 9 Nazgûl, 6, and all that stuff. So that if we transition that into game terms, then you will have the Witch King and then 4 guys or 4 Nazgûl there. That means that there's supposed to be 4 left. So that actually, from my perspective, makes sense that you could then squander these at the next couple of years and say every now and then a new super powerful Marquee will be added to the team that will then change the team composition. But it also means, and that's also something APGains talks about, is that the leader effect for the Witch King needs to be updated continuously to accommodate this sort of behavior. I'm not so sure that's what they want to do. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I think from us at some point they will have to diverge from the law, right? They have to explore the what if scenarios, and whether or not they do that right now or in the coming months or not will be interesting to see. I don't have any strong opinion on it, right? As I said, I'm not a super law buff there, but it is an interesting thesis, definitely it is.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very interesting thesis, but I find myself disagreeing with him for a number of reasons. I do think he is right that there's this opportunity for basically to release 4 characters, 4 Nazgûl that go with the Witch King as a powerful team, and then they can continue to release more powerful Nazgûl as that comes out. But like you mentioned, they have to start digging into this what if side of things. And one of the dev Q&As with the game director, Nick Reinhardt, he mentioned that they plan on having a what if character, possibly 2, but definitely 1 released by the end of the year. And so I have long held this kind of, I put it in my long-term prediction video, actually. I think it's going to be something to do with the Ring Wraiths and the Nazgûl. In particular, I think that it might be some sort of Frodo Ring Wraith type situation. And then that way, in the end, we will have a 5-5 team, 1 with a what if character, and then 4 Nazgûl, and then Witch King and another 4 Nazgûl. And I think that's pretty good. But where I disagree with APGains is thinking that the Witch King is going to be something similar to Commander Luke Skywalker. I don't think, in my mind, that makes sense from a marketing perspective. To me, the person that's going to end up being the most like Commander Luke Skywalker is Aragorn. And I do like Lord of the Rings, and that's one of the reasons I do play this game, and I think it makes a lot more sense to, 1, draw people in, and to keep players here is if Aragorn ends up being the Commander Luke Skywalker of this game. And I think that actually, there's a lot of parallels between those 2 characters already that you could draw, and so I think it just makes sense to have him be that way. He also kind of has his fingers in a lot of different pies in terms of groups he could be a part of. So you're not necessarily having to always update his leadership so much as, okay, we're now releasing some new, let's say we're releasing the Gondor team, and therefore, when Aragorn fits into the Gondor team, it gets supercharged in some XYZ way. So that's kind of where I'm at. I do think it's a really interesting thesis and something we hadn't previously been talking about, in that they're probably going to draw from Swigo. And so there is this character there that they have as a constant sort of up on top of the meta, and he's just a very good standalone character, but he also is, great in forming a team. So I think that's a really interesting thesis. So I'm going to leave the link to the video down in the description below so you can go watch it and see what APGains has to say for himself, and we're not just putting words in his mouth. But the next topic that I think we want to talk about here is kind of related to all this still, is character releases, and specifically the monetization of character releases. And I think the first thing we want to talk about here is battle passes. So I'll explain from the Swigo side of things my understanding of what's happening here, which is essentially they have battle pass for Conquest, which is a game mode they have in Swigo, and you can buy like a premium track for the battle pass, but it does not get you extra character shards. It simply gives you a lot more gear and access, I think, to some crates or something like that down the line. But all the character shards you can get are up at the top in the free sort of thing. But there's also a battle pass situation in MSF, and I think, Torm, you're more familiar with that. So can you explain what's going on there?
Yeah, so the concept is the same, right? The only thing is that Scopely has always been very good at squeezing their whales. So from a monetization perspective, you're basically doubling up on shards collected from the pass, and you're also doubling up a number of the rewards depending on which pass it is, because they actually do because that. Their commander level, as it's called, right, similar to what we have ring bearer level in this game, determines which pass you can actually get. So newbies would get a pass specifically for them that would help create maybe like gear tier 12. In Marvel Strike Force, I think they have like gear tier 18 by now. So yeah, I think 12 and 13, that's where you would normally be up to level 70, which still takes 200 days or something. So but yeah, at the end of the day, it's about doubling the shards you typically get for the character in question.
So,
and I actually think when they were introduced, there was a lot of back and forth on it. But from my perspective as a spender, it was a no-brainer, right? It was $20 a month, or however fast it was done. They actually added another pass called the Mojo Pass from that TV's character that does something similar. So there's actually 2 battle passes now in Marvel Strike Force. But either way, it's a quick $20. Set it and forget it, right? We spent more just getting out of bed. So
yeah. So am I correct in assuming basically the release for characters in Marvel Strike Force, they'll release the character sometime before this, and then the character that ends up in the Strike Pass has already been released. You've gotten him some other way, and then you can get more shards of him by buying the Battle Pass. So you get shards of him just in the free version of the Battle Pass, but then you can double or get more shards of that character if you do the premium version. Is that correct?
Yes, but I think that it's also worthwhile to mention that that's one of the very, very big differences between Swigo and MSF, is that Swigo has been very kind to the community from a farming perspective, whereas MSF is historically notoriously not very fast with their premium characters. So this means that it's not uncommon for a new, quotation marks, new character to be completely unfarmable except for these events or battle passes for eight months, a year even. I think the record was Icarus, which it was almost 2 years before he was made available generally. He was super powerful, of course, but 2 years, right, that wouldn't work in Swigo or maybe even in this one.
Yeah, so I think my understanding of the Swigo one, I stopped playing some time ago, but my current understanding, because I have friends and guildies who still play, is that you don't get extra shards by paying for the premium part. You get mostly gears and resources, and that this is probably the only way you're getting these shards, and that you have to do well in conquests, is that type of thing. I think we're probably both on the same page about. I guess I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think they are going to add a battle pass to this game at some point in time, probably sooner rather than later. What do you think?
It's a good question. I actually don't think it would be sooner, to be fair, because there aren't that many characters that are unavailable, and those that are unavailable are not super interesting, I would say. So I guess it depends on what they would, price it first and foremost. How is it priced? And then what does it actually give other than character shards? If they keep it at $20 and they are semi-reasonable with their output, then I will gobble it up because it's $20. Who cares? But I don't think it's going to be soon. Actually, there's a number of characters we need to see first to have more interesting teams before I think that becomes a good way to give shards out. Because again, they've already, like we showed last time, right, with Arwen. Now they've shown the hand, and basically on the monetization perspective, right, I don't actually understand why they're doing it this fast. And the reason I say this is because from a commercial perspective, the cost in gems to go from 5-star to 7-star through the supply stores is roughly $200 worth, right? So 22,000 if you have the 5 shards for 225 gems as the baseline. And I actually did that for Arvin. And I was almost done with Elrond before they bugged him out. So, but this means that now that they have shown their hand, I'm not going to be doing that in the future. So this is basically $400 that they aren't going to get in the future from me. So from a commercial perspective, I don't actually understand why they would do that. It's great from a player perspective, right? Because of course, new Marquees can come out, we can farm them relatively fast. Thumbs up, that's very nice. But from a commercial perspective, I don't actually understand it.
I think it has probably something to do with they think that they can probably get the most. They're going to get the most out of Krakens initially when the Marquee drops, and then maybe they just don't see as many people purchasing in the gem store, and they would prefer to keep their cadence of getting these things out so that people can then get legendary characters more than they would prefer to, make the extra $200. I'm not entirely sure. That's just my pure speculation, but so far we've only had basically Marquees. That was the way it was for a long time in Swigo. They basically only did Marquees, and then they did some galactic chase stuff for ships, which was fine, I guess. And then so it seems like now one of the ways you can get characters is by doing this sort of battle pass thing with Conquest, which is another game mode that they have in there. So would you like to see a battle pass sooner rather than later, if it meant not having a Marquee, if that's how they release the character instead of a Marquee?
That's also a very good question, because I don't actually mind the Marquee method. Right, I said that last time as well. I guess it came true in a sense. I said, I don't actually mind that maybe we should do 3 a month instead of 2, and we have 3 this month, right? And that poses the question: is that going to be the new baseline going forward? And I guess that depends on who you are as a person. For me, I play these games for wide building, right? So I want more characters to come faster. Because no one is saying we have to buy them, right? That's just something we've done in the past. There's no one saying we will be doing that in the future. But I definitely want to have as many characters available for playing around with as possible, as soon as possible, right? So how they deliver them to me, I don't really care about. I guess it depends a lot on what is the timelines and what is the total cost, right? The $120 for a 5-star Marquee, I mean, it is what it is, right? We gobble it up, we move along. It's about the same in MSF. They have an additional layer with their red stars, which I hope we aren't getting in this game anytime soon either. But yeah, I mean it's roughly the same, right? As long as they keep that around that level for a character, I don't really care on how the delivery method is.
Okay, I think I'm a little bit different than you here, in that I would prefer them to actually mix it up every once in a while, and this is obviously going to take a lot more work on CG's end, and probably not as much reward in terms of monetization, but some type of like big event where maybe there are multiple new characters attached to it, and it's kind of, a weeks long thing that's a little bit cinematic, and there's a story, and you can unlock the characters much like Marquee to 3 stars, but you could, of course, monetize that in a way as well. But I think it would be cool to maybe release characters at the same time in a sort of cinematic, story progressive type way. Obviously, that takes a lot more work for the money they're going to get. But what I think that does is it gets people interested in playing the game, and it keeps people interested in playing the game. And Marquee after Marquee after Marquee just becomes a pretty tired delivery method for new characters in my mind. Like you said, I think people who are going to spend are just going to spend and then be done with it, but it's not super engaging. And a lot of the people who are playing this game, I feel like, come from MSF, or at least a lot of the vocal ones are coming from MSF, and they would like to see a lot more of a kind of story-based release method that you could, of course, slap some form of monetization on. But from their perspective, I've seen the story aspect isn't really coming through like it was in MSF, something that they're more used to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true, right? But again, in MSF there was a lot of RNG because it was layers on layers upon RNG, and I'm not a big fan of that, both for the rating content and for otherwise, right? So I actually prefer this sort of thing that they're doing in this game. Because it's fairly straightforward. There's no hocus pocus. Sure, you can get lucky on the 1,000 gem chest that we get from Marquees, and that's fine. But I mean, as long as they keep the average okay, then I don't mind it if it's 7,000 or 8,000 that we do to calculate with. And if we get lucky, we get lucky. But other than that, it's fine. In MSF, there was you both had to pay up front to get more currency for the given event, to farm more shards, which then gave you enough for an RNG orb. But the orbs typically only gave 3 to 6 shards per orb, depending on what it was. So you had to super farm all these events constantly, and there was a lot of screen time needed to actually do that. And that's where I would say it becomes a problem for me, is that it was the same with Blitz releases, right? I want on record, I want to say I never ever hope we get a Blitz type scenario in this game, because the time requirements are so crazy. Charge me an extra $50 so we don't have to do that. I'm fine with that, right? We can't treat this as a second job. It has to remain a leisureable hobby, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I'm not saying they should change up the monetization. They could keep the chest, do all that sort of thing. I think they should just put a little bit more effort into the storytelling aspect of these types of releases. So one thing that they did do for the raid release that I actually really, really like is the little cutscene that they have at the beginning. It's, it's not telling a massive story that's like super impactful, but it adds a little bit of storytelling and narrative about what's happening while you're playing the mines. And I actually think that little bit goes a long way for a lot of people. Maybe not people who are so, min-maxing, trying to just think about rosters and all that sort of thing, and are super competitive. But I think for a casual player, that really goes a long way. But like I said, it's kind of a lot of effort for maybe not that much reward. It does make their game a little bit better in my mind. But speaking of other types of monetization, I wanted to bring up something that they do in MSF that and get your opinion on that, is the skins. And are they still making skins for characters in MSF?
To be fair, I'm not actually sure, because I put the game down after spending $1,000 in 10 days. But yeah, they have done skins in the past. Those were not actually typically monetized as such. They were typically part of an event. And sure, there was in some scenarios where you could at later stages, buy these orbs so that you could get the currency to actually get the skins, but they were not monetized as such to begin with.
I see.
So they were more like raid rewards. But on the topic of monetization for skins, I would say as long as it's purely cosmetic, and as long as they make awesome skins, charge me $20, I will gobble them up and we will move forward, right? I have a huge problem with it if it comes with stat changes as part of it.
I 100% agree with that. I think if it's purely cosmetic and they look amazing, then absolutely do it. I think they're going to have a little bit of trouble because historically, Swigo puts out multiple versions of a character instead. They do that in MSF, but and they managed to do some skins here as well. But I think they would kind of prefer to save it for a different kind of version of the character. And also, I'm not entirely sure if the art style gives them the sort of creative freedom to make some of these skins. I don't know. I would, if it's a cosmetic only thing, I would kind of welcome it, and that's fine, especially if it's like, okay, our cosmetic only sales sort of shores up some of the other things we were lacking, so we don't have to push monetization so hard in terms of progression systems. Although I guess why wouldn't you do both? But I'm pretty okay with skins coming into the game if that's something that they want to do. They haven't done it in Swigo, I believe. But I would welcome that in this game.
Yeah, I think for them to do that, though, they probably need to update their graphical engine, to be fair. The fidelity of this game is not probably where we would want it to be. I know they said, they want to target phones, etc. But at the end of the day, most of their players are probably playing through an emulator. So I guess my question is, why aren't they just releasing it on Google Play Beta or doing a real Steam release or something? It's probably better for everyone. But yeah, I mean, if they want to monetize skins, I would be all for it, as long as there's no stats involved.
Yeah. Okay. As long as there's no stats involved. So we are going to now talk about, kind of change a little bit of gears a little bit and talk about where each of us is moving. Let me change up here. Where each of us is kind of moving in terms of our accounts, what direction we're going to be focusing on here. So I'll let you start for your main account, and maybe I know you have multiple free-to-play accounts, but your most beloved free-to-play account, let's say. What are your future directions for your squads?
So I'd say from my free-to-play accounts, they are in except for the new Haratron one, which I started a couple of weeks ago. I think the main one where I'm level 60 on the free-to-play account, that one is actually in trouble. And it's in trouble because I focused on Halberad. I didn't farm I basically, I guess, to preface and backtrack on why I do these multiple accounts is to try various things. Right? We already know what the recommendation is, so I'm not going to do the recommendation on my own accounts because the recommendation works. Right? We know the works. So I try to do other things for my free-to-play accounts. And the one that is 60 right now, I have one that is 60, one that is 56, and one that is 41, I think it is. So the one that is 60, that one is in trouble. Right? It's troubling in arena because I didn't farm Ironhide and Oclock and all that stuff. I'm not going to pivot to it. I'm almost done with I did Elrond here already, and I'm almost done with Neramiri. But basically the preface is that I can't go back and farm these chapter 1 characters because I need the rare ability mats, and I need them so much that that is not going to be an option for me for quite some time. So that one is in trouble. It can't get to Shadow Heart 5.5 right now because the team I focused on is light. We don't have the character XP to take up a shadow team as free to play, unfortunately. So that one is probably squandered a little bit. The Haratron one is I guess in the opposite direction, right? Because it's fairly new. It's doing okay in I think I'm in shard number, is it 12? I think it's up to. I'm high gold, low methyl there. Still, but I mean, as time is going on and people are doing these recommendations, then it's going to fall, right? I'm refreshing Ep2, hoping to get to Robles node shortly, so I can do a full team there. I'm using Neramiri as the 5th in arena. She's doing fine. She's almost 7 stars now. But again, that account also needs rare ability mats, so I don't think I'm going to go back there and farm one of the characters from chapter 1. On the main account, it's a little different. I'm still farming a Haratron, of course. I'm doing 2 refreshes on Lomian, Ep2, and Robel right now until they are done. They are all 6 stars right now or better. I'm almost done with Ep2 from an ability perspective. Right, he just needs his basic. So I think in 10 days or so, from an ability match perspective, I will be fully done with the Haratron. They will be 66666, all that jazz. So that will be very nice. And what I'm doing after is actually still up in the air. Because I have enough character XP to take, I think, 3 characters to 60 right now. So I will probably look at raid teams, but I think from a what's the next team going to be, that is up in the air. I'm not doing dwarves. I've already decided that, so maybe I'll do something crazy like done lending and get ready for them, or something, or maybe Gondor or whatever. But yeah, it's not going to be RCR, even though they seem to be a solid raid team. I'm still going to get them to like 40, and because my Strider is already built in 60 and all that stuff, so maybe I'll just do the strong Strider and drag the hobbits through 2.1.1 for Sam's adventure. But yeah, the next team I'm not actually sure on.
Okay, interesting. So for my main account, I'm finishing up. I still need to get some skills on the Rivendell team, on Elrond and Lomian, so I got to finish that up. And then for me, I am focusing on dwarves, so that's actually the next team I'm going to bring up to try and do difficulty 3 in raids. I feel pretty comfortable elsewhere with my main account. So the dwarves are the next big one for me. I'm obviously going to be going for Biffer, and I also already had Shadow Hard 5/5 unlocked, so I don't have to worry about that. That is something I have to worry about on my free-to-play account, and so I am able to get over 500,000 points in my free-to-play account pretty easily. I'm kind of coming in on 1 million, I would say. And so actually the thing I want to focus on is then getting my elves ready for the return of Elrond there. Those are kind of my big two directions currently. I think they are going to eventually get more Fellowship out towards the end of the year, and then I'm going to have to refocus on that. But for now, I need so many ability mats, so many purple ability mats, that I just have to, I can't farm any of the Chapter 1 stuff, even though I kind of want to farm Ironhide, Ugluk, and Pippin up more, probably to 7 stars. I can't do that right now. And I'm very close on Naramiri. I'm 100 shards away. And so when I need more blue ability mats, because I'm very low on those, I only have 67 on my main account, then I'm going to have to go back and farm those as well. But I have to stick on Chapter 5 for a while. One, because of this rare ability mats. I have almost 1,000 here, but I need the gold and I need character XP. I'm actually really, really short on character XP, and it's because I keep leveling up new characters because I decided to pivot all of a sudden, and instead of bringing up my Rohan, I decided to go full in on dwarves. So that's where I'm kind of headed on both of my accounts. And this sort of transitions us into our second to last topic, our penultimate topic, I would say, is that how are we feeling about the game in general? And I'll let you talk about, we'll kind of do like, what's your rose and what's your thorn? You know, what's some things you are feeling good about in the game, and then we'll talk about some things we think are maybe 1 or 2 things that they should be on the top of their priority list in terms of addressing.
Yeah, so if we start with the good stuff first, I think the basic gameplay loop, is appealing to me, right? There's not a big requirement of on time, which I actually enjoy quite a bit. It's always fine that Discord is the real end game, so we can spend lots of time there. But in the game itself, I'm fine with the time requirements as they are right now. I'm fine with the release cadence on Marquees. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm happy that the guild rewards at least seem okay. I may be a little concerned on the jump, as we talked about, for the various chests, but yeah, overall I think those are good. It looks like they are accelerating the release of the chapters for the raids, so that's also quite fine. So yeah, I think overall that's good. There's a lot of focus on bug fixing, it seems, as well. I keep track on the Discord for the bugs and stuff, right? Some of the basic ones are not seen that much, which is okay. But obviously the game is at a point now where it needs to grow to probably really be successful. And I guess that transitions a little over to the negative points, right? Because at the end of the day, I don't want to start a witch hunt on Heme or anything of the sort, right? Because she's not in charge of this. But I will say directly to if by some chance one of the execs or PMs for this game listens to this podcast, right? You guys need to do a better job at communication. Right, what we've seen so far is completely unacceptable, and I think if there's one thing that I think they really need to do something on, if there's one thing that would cause me to put the game down and walk away, it would be the lack of communication we're seeing. Right, it's fine that stuff changes, right? Because again, I work with this professionally as well, right? I'm a PM in a Fortune 100 company, so I understand all the timelines and stuff that with development that could go wrong and all that stuff. I get it; it's not a problem, right? What is a problem is that they are not upfront with this communication. Heme had historically tried. In her mind, she's doing us a favor by giving us, half-truth messages that can be read differently depending on if you're a native speaker or not. I mean, I appreciate the effort. I really do, and I don't have a problem with him as a person. But from a communication strategy, that can't be the approach to take. We need some very clear, specific notice on what is going on when, so that we can plan accordingly, right, Arbus? The thing they did with Chapter 2 is completely unacceptable, right? I had spent a lot of time, a lot of money on Haradrim to showcase this for the community, but because we trusted the half-truth that was said, we didn't actually get to try Chapter 2. Right, so stuff like that. I mean, that can't happen. Flat off. That needs to stop. We need to get very clear and very specific messages on these things that affect the entire community.
Okay, I guess I'll start with my, positives. I still they're pretty much very similar to yours. I still very much enjoy playing this game. I find the mechanics to be relatively interesting, and I think that's good. I don't think they're the most interesting mechanics in the world, but for just a starting out game, I actually think the mechanics are relatively interesting. I really like the raids. I like pretty much all aspects of them. I have a little bit of trouble with the RNG type thing, but it doesn't bother me as much as I think it bothers some other people. I'm very much enjoying the game. The amount of screen time is very important to me. And this game does not feel like a chore. It still feels like a game that I'm having fun playing, and that is what is important to me. Similar to what your critique is, and the thing I think they need to fix first and foremost is in-game communication, because they do not post their patch notes on the website, and they do not send an in-game notification that there have been some sort of update or patch notes. And I think that has to be rolled out sooner rather than later. I kind of made this point, I think, in a previous video, which was, this last patch on Thursday when they introduced Chapter 2 of the raid, and they also updated the kind of power level calculations. Can you imagine you're not somebody who's on Discord, which is actually a vast majority of the people who play these types of games, is they're not on Discord doing this type of thing, or at least the official Discord, and then they log in and they see that all of their team powers have changed and everybody in the arena's changed, and you just go, what the heck is going on? And there's no way for them to communicate that, or they did not communicate that in game. So I don't like that they don't do that communication in game, and that they don't do it on their website. I think they should be posting the patch notes in the website. And then I will talk about something that you said. I don't think this is CG Heem's fault. I actually think I really like CG Heem, and I think she's really tried to throw the community a bone. And I personally am of the opinion that basically she's going to stop giving out those little read between the lines sort of hints, and just going to go with the CG method of communication, which is we're not going to say anything until we're absolutely sure. And then I think once that happens, people are going to kind of ping pong back and be like, please tell us anything at all. And I don't know what their solution is there, because CG is so... They just don't want to do it. And I don't have any insights. It's not that I don't have any insight. I don't have a specific reason. I can't speak for them and say, this is X, Y, and Z why they do it. I think they do it because, like you said, they are worried about shifting timelines, and in their mind, whether this is right or not, or whether you think this is right or not, is kind of irrelevant. But in their mind, they think that changing the deadline and shifting things is a worse look than not saying anything at all and then just releasing it when they know that they have it. So you can think that that's good or bad. I'm not sure. That's kind of what I think that they're thinking. I don't know if that's going to change, to be honest. And I do think that CG Heem is probably, especially after this past week, maybe not say as much either. And so we'll see how the community reacts to that, I suppose. I do think people felt a little burned after this week. It's not I think. I know people feel burned. You just expressed that, and as well as other people in my Discord and talking about that very similar thing. So communication is probably the number one thing on both of our lists. For me, it's making sure that they get the updates that they do push out communicate those particular things. And for you, I think it's more on the front end of letting us know when things are going to happen. That way we can plan. But either way, that's been an issue, I think, across the community for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that is the crux of the matter, I'm not actually sure because to be fair, right, in my profession, the dev team that reports to me, they feel the same, right? They don't want to let people down. They don't want to let the business down. But stuff happens, right? It's the real world. Stuff happens, and I would say I don't want to sound bitter or angry about it. I would also say that if a change in communication happened, then I would get up on that hill and defend CG if it cost me my life, basically, right? Because that's the flip side of this. If we actually get the communication, then and we are actually treated as adult and not as mushrooms that is kept in the dark and fed manure, right? If we actually treated as adults, as valuable human beings, then sentiment would shift. It would shift very naturally. We would be in awe of that they wanted to communicate with us, even if they said, hey guys, we had this plan, this Thursday was supposed to be the date, something came up during QA, we're not going to release right now, we are still huddling on when that will be. People would say, thumbs up, that sounds excellent, thank you for the due diligence, we look forward to it. Right. Instead, we get nothing, and I think that's basically the premise. I can understand all the legal stuff, with EA being a stock exchange company, all that stuff, right? But at the end of the day, this is a niche area where we just need some adult communication, really.
I wish I had the same view as you, that people would feel, like, give them benefit of the doubt if they had to move deadlines. I actually don't think that's the case. And it's good to hear you say that you would, like, defend that if they chose to go with that method of they're communicating and then they say, okay, something came up and they had to push it back. I, unfortunately, am very cynical about this particular thing, and I think people would drag them through the dirt. And I think I, like you, would want to say, well, this is actually good and things do come up. And like, that's unfortunate that things are getting delayed. So I'm very much on your side on that. I just don't think that people would treat it that way. And this actually, I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit here and talk about just generally critiquing the game. As you can see from the past, probably 10 minutes of our conversation here, Torm and I both have critiques of the game. In fact, I think Torm feels pretty strongly about some of the critiques he has. But I think one thing that I don't like seeing when people critique the game is they're just always critiquing, and then they don't give credit where credit is due. And I think that makes things a little bit imbalanced, and it just makes it seem like you're complaining all the time. So if you're in the main Discord and like the only thing you're doing is just complaining all the time and you never give credit where credit is due when things do go well, then it's hard to take those critiques seriously. It's almost like kind of crying wolf. And it also, I think this is the part that annoys me the most, is that when people have, I think, valid critiques, it sort of gets watered down because of these other sort of people just complaining about things that are weird things to complain about, or they aren't giving credit where credit is due to kind of balance out the other side. And then I think the company itself, as well as, it kind of sets up this weird dynamic where everybody feels a little bit negative. The company itself is not trying to kind of can shut their ears off to criticism. And the players just feel like things are bad, especially the players on the Discord feel like things are not in a good state because everybody's complaining all the time. So it also annoys me, this is my last point here, it also annoys me a little bit because I feel like when I try and step in and defend something that I think is not actually something that's worth complaining about, it makes me feel like I'm defending a company, which I'm not actually a big fan of doing. I don't like doing that. I just like, I guess, the criticisms to feel fair and leveled. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I feel much the same, right? I have no problems with him either, right? I've publicly praised her for some of her work. Again, I don't think she's the problem at all. And I think to your point, right? There's, but that's probably just the internet, right? I'm past 40, right? So I try to be as balanced in my approach as I can, right? I guess that's like a little stoicism there. We can't control the world, right? But we can control how we react to the world. And I think without going into full white knight mode or anything, I do think the community at large should maybe, not be as aggressive as the community sometimes can be, right? There's a lot of egging on, I would say.
Yeah. I think we're 100% on the same page here. There is sometimes a little stirring the pot for stirring the pot's sake, and not in a way that is not amusing. Sometimes it can be very amusing, but other times it is not. And I think, like you said, it's just being on the internet is probably the big deal with that there. So with that out of the way, I think we want to transition into our last topic here, which is talking about whether the game is dying or not. So I'm going to quickly go through some Sensor Tower stuff, because this has been a topic of conversation amongst content creators for the past 2 weeks now, right? Videos coming out from big content creators basically saying or suggesting that the game is dying, or if that they do not perform well in the next month revenue-wise, that the game is probably on the downturn and dying. And so I just want to point out what they were talking about, right? So they're talking about Sensor Tower, which, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, in the comments, that Sensor Tower basically collects its data by installing third-party apps on phones that track screen time and track purchases, and then they basically can use some sort of fitting algorithm that they've had and basically extrapolate, okay, well, we have X number of people who have downloaded and are playing, and they've got, we've tracked this amount from these people, so we can extrapolate to that to a revenue number. I think the downloads are probably pretty accurate. I am not as convinced that the revenue numbers are pretty accurate. I think they might be in an order of magnitude range sort of accurate. We don't know, I think, is the big issue. And so I don't think you should take this as like God's given truth that this is exactly what they're making. It's probably in the ballpark. I don't think it's exact. So with that in mind, I just want to show that for last month, the revenue for the Google Play Store for this game was probably in the 500K range. And the Apple Store is similar in the 500K range. So my guess, if I were to estimate, is probably they made somewhere between 1 to 3 million based on what I'm seeing on Sensor Tower alone. For context, this is a chart also from Sensor Tower, so using basically the same fitting algorithms that they used to extrapolate to get to revenue numbers over the course of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes' lifetime here. And so Star Wars Galaxy of Hero had a limited test release in Australia, I believe, in August of 2015, and then a more worldwide release late November of 2015. And they estimate that they made about 18 million in that sort of end of the year cycle for Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And then, of course, this obviously ramped up over time. This is a massively successful game, one of the most successful games specifically of this type, of this RPG type squad builder game in the history of these types of games, right? It's made over $1 billion, and it's continued to grow in that particular way. So that's just kind of, I wanted to give you a little bit of context there that according to Sensor Tower, this is definitely lagging behind in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes numbers. But Torm went ahead and took a look at the earnings report for EA, talking specifically, they've got parts in here talking about their mobile releases. So I'll let you kind of talk about that here.
Yes. So basically, I guess the execs mentioned the game, I think it's like 3 times, where they mention this Swigo quite a lot, which makes sense, right? This is a new game coming out that had some, I would say, initial issues, right? Because if we look at the amount of downloads initially, I think it's fair to say that the community could have been much larger if we didn't have the tutorial box to begin with. Because that caused a lot of people to abandon the game right there and then, which is unfortunate because they probably are not coming back. But yeah, I think the execs seemed happy with the release and Q1 metrics. They said that this is going to be a growth area. They had faith in the team. There was a good number of expectations set on this. So I'm not too worried. All this doom and gloom stuff. I am of course a little sad that the community isn't as large as it could have been if the tutorial box had been fixed. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. As long as the team can keep paying for its own development, I don't actually think EA will be too big of a hassle. Obviously, they want to squeeze the whale if they can, because at the end of the day, this is a for-profit enterprise, right? We have to remember that this is the case. They don't make these games for the blue in our eyes' sake. So yeah, it is what it is. I'm not too worried there. I think it will be very interesting to see the Q2 numbers or the Q2 releases from EA, which is I think scheduled to be released to the public start of November. So basically, the quarter end for EA's revenue ends in September, and then there's a month where they do the calculation and all that stuff, and then they do the investor call in start of November for Q2. So I think it will be very interesting to see if there's any mention of the game there. And that's also why I said a little earlier in this podcast that I think September is going to be a month where they will look to make up for any lack of scorecards as they pertain to dollars spent for this game. Right? I would expect a lot of offers coming up.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just, I will quickly read the 3 different times they mention it in this particular earnings report. So I'm just going to read exactly what they have on here. So during the quarter, we launched Lord of the Rings Heroes of Middle-earth. Based on strong metrics, the team is tuning and balancing the game to scale user acquisition and promotion in coming months. I'm going to, I want to touch on that once I get through reading these. In mobile, net bookings were up 3% year over year, 5% in constant currency, excluding the impact of lapping the sunset of Apex Mobile, which is another big EA title. I think that's their biggest mobile title. Maybe, actually, it might be FIFA that's bigger, but Apex and FIFA are their 2 big mobile titles under EA right now, I think. Continue to make material progress across our portfolio as we manage our business for long-term profitability. FIFA Mobile delivered record Q1 net bookings, almost doubling from the prior year, driven by historic levels of player engagement and new player acquisition. And although early in our launch, initial metrics are promising for our new title, Lord of the Rings Heroes of Middle-earth. And then this last one here, I think, how do we preface? Okay, let me read the question up here. Eric, just to add on a couple of points there on the financial side, obviously we talked on to Q1 outside of the Apex headwinds, which will be there for several quarters as we lap the sunset of the title. Basically, they're talking about Apex did very well, so how do you kind of think about things moving into a time when it's not so hyped up? Obviously, we're up 3% and 5% at constant currency, as we saw in the script. I think, how do we preface that quarter over quarter? We're seeing, to the point in the script, overperforming expectations on some of our key titles, specifically Galaxy of Heroes is continuing to perform over expectations. We talked to FIFA, also seems to be doing very well. And we continue to roll out on Lord of the Rings Heroes of Middle-earth and expect that to continue and grow through subsequent quarters. So what's pretty constant in all 3 times that they mention this is them talking about specifically scaling up the game. And so I think there's this may be the way that other mobile games have released, and it's definitely the way that PC games and console games release, where you generate a bunch of hype and news and ad stuff before the game is released. You buy a bunch of people, you get people to buy a bunch of, copies of the game, and you get a big, strong release, and that pulls in a lot of your cash flow. And what they're specifically saying for this game and how they're rolling this game out, which I think they did for Swigo as well, and I've also seen CG, he mentioned this, is that they're looking to scale up user acquisition and promotion in the coming months. So they did not do that for launch, but they were going to continue to do this into the future. And I think they're specifically waiting for big chunks of the raid to come out. And we've seen that already. Boylon and Dorky Dad have done advertisements for this game on their MSF channels, trying to get people to come over, I guess specifically from MSF, to play this particular game. So I think it would have been, like, to your point, I think it would have been really great if they didn't have so many tutorial bugs and we could have kept a larger chunk of the user base there. But from what I'm seeing in their earnings reports, it seems like they're going to be scaling up user acquisition. And so from here on out, they have to make sure that they're growing their player base. So I think that's one point that I want to make. And I'm going to also agree with Torm here. I do not think the game is dying. I think they have a long leash because they have a strong IP, and people love Lord of the Rings just like people love Star Wars, and that gives them a longer leash than, say, a game that doesn't have as strong as IP. Because my reasoning for that is that when other products that are Lord of the Rings related come out over the next 5-6 years, that's going to drive people to this game, regardless of whether you think Rings of Power is good or not. When they release those types of things, you know, they have a bunch of Lord of the Rings other games coming out. They've got, you know, possibly some movies. There's an animated movie that's supposed to come out next year, right? That will drive people to this game. That's the way it happened in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. They started ramping up all these other different types of Star Wars media, and that drove players to play Swigo. So I think they're kind of banking on that as well. They seem to think that this has been a pretty strong start. I don't have access to those numbers, so I guess I am. I don't think it's as strong as it could have been, but I am with Torm here. I do not think the game is dying, and you can think that that's copium all you want, but I think from what I've seen and what I'm reading in these earnings reports and how they are starting to move in terms of player acquisition and ad rollouts, to me, this is a game that they're trying to, you know, sink their hooks into a lot of people at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I agree there, and it's also worth prefacing that Q1 for EA ended in June. So yeah, they would basically not have a number of the other Marquees that was released after for Elrond from a timeline perspective, right? So and with that in mind, I don't think it's the doom and gloom is not there, right? As I said, that's probably not going to be what is the key piece. It's going to be can they do at scale user acquisition.
Yep, I 100% agree with that. And that is another piece of the puzzle that we kind of want to talk about here. And this is another, you know, it wouldn't be a podcast or a video from this channel without including more spreadsheets. And so we have for you here a spreadsheet that Torm made talking specifically about whale spending or Kraken spending and kind of what to expect. And what prompted this in particular was a MobileGamer video that just recently came out talking about an old article from Forbes, I believe, about how 0.15% of the player base drives 50% of revenue spending in a good chunk of mobile games. And Torm did some math on that, and so I'd like to have him explain kind of what that means. What do we have going on here, Torm?
Yeah. So basically, what I also found some old data from the links are there, right? Both from Game Analytics and Infogram. But the idea is basically that, and obviously CG has their own sort of thing, right? This is 2023. They have AI profiles on all of us if we ever spent a single dollar there. So it's worth noting that research shows that roughly 2% of the player base of any given size will spend money. Right, so all of you guys that are saying, "Oh man, if the offers was cheaper, I would buy some." I mean, maybe that is the case for you specifically as a person, but overall as a collective, that's not what's going to happen. Right, so that is what it is. The other part is that roughly 1% is going to be the minnow category, and obviously in the stuff I found, they don't talk about specifically how much revenue that is. They just say 1% of the player base is a minnow, and the minnows spend 1% of total revenue. The same thing with dolphins. That's also roughly 1%, but they spend 13% of the total revenue. And then, of course, our lovely whales, they're not even 1/5%, but they spend 60 or 86% of the total revenue. So if you ever wondered why the pricing is what it is, this is the table you should be looking at, because if you go to the left a little bit in the sheet, what I did is in the top hand side, right, I said, you know, this is a theoretical active player base, right? I don't think there's 500K playing this game right now, but if there were, this is the sort of breakdown we would expect. So basically, the green box is the expected number of players, and then the yellow box is, if you were to get $2 million a month, then how would that break down between the three cohorts? And basically, and that's where we can go back to the right side. Basically, you can see the minnows are doing like $4 a month on average. But their revenue share is so minor that they may not as well exist, right? So that's why I'm saying the pricing of the offers we see do not impact the revenue significantly. So that's actually why we're not going to be seeing these smaller offers. Maybe they will be doing them, just to trick people to spend, because that is also another thing, right? Research shows that minnows and dolphins are very quick to spend money, and whales typically take a little longer. But the reason they do that is because whales typically only have one game that they play and spend in. And maybe they'll have two, but typically they only have one. Whereas minnows, dolphins, and free-to-play, they play many of these games. So obviously, money being a finite resource, if you play many games, then of course you're not going to be spending a lot of money in every game, right? And most of us don't have that kind of leisure cash. I know I don't, and I'm a whale, right? So that is the thing. But if you look at the whale specifically, because that's where I think it is interesting, I was actually I had to double check the number because it sounded crazy. But then I remembered our good friends over on LOTR.gg, right? I found myself my own profile on that site, and I'm on page 5. That means I'm like top 150 or so in the game right now on total collective power. And I've spent roughly $3,300. So I think I'm on page 5 still. But that also means that when you find my profile and you look at everyone that is ahead of me, right? Yeah, I guess you went harder then, or went wider, I guess, because my account is, I would say, tall at this point, right? Because I focused extreme amounts of resources on basically 2 teams, right? Haradrim and Elves. I could easily up my TCP score by going wide on, just building R2R or increasing Isengard or whatever to have more raid teams. But I don't actually like doing that. So that's another point. But if you look at the top guys, right, the front of the page, those guys have twice my TCP. Right. So
Hino's he's close to 3 times our TCP.
Yeah, he's a beast. He's a beast. So I think that that's why in the Excel that's why there's this big number. The other thing to understand is that from a commercial perspective, it's actually quite expensive to acquire new customers. So that's why and given that whales typically take around 7 to 9 days, it depends a little, the research says, but 7 to 9 days is typically when whales start committing to a game. So that means that if you're unsuccessful as a company on keeping your players engaged for that amount of time, chances are you're not going to find that next player that will help drive revenue. And that's where I said, the tutorial box that probably hit them quite hard. But hopefully that is now fixed, and with the raid chapters coming out, etc. That's also why the raid requirements are so low initially, I would assume, so that people can get that hook to keep playing. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to, can they find the next whale or next Kraken player that they can keep and be consistent with, because that's where they are going to get their revenue.
Yeah, and I think something that I've definitely always struggled with is believing these sort of orders of magnitude differences between spenders. I certainly, even now, right, I've been presented with these sort of numbers, and it's still hard for me to 0.2% of the player base being responsible for 86% of the total revenue. And even within that 0.2% of the player base, there's obviously a massive spread, right? Hino, I actually am not sure exactly how to pronounce their name, but is outspending you and me by a significant margin. ZJ is outspending you and me by a significant margin, right? These are people at the top of the leaderboards here, and they've got almost 300k power for ZJ here, and over 330 for Hino. So that's massive. between their spending and what I'm spending. And I think what's is an interesting, I'll phrase it as interesting. What is an interesting choice here for mobile games is they've put themselves in this position where they are essentially beholden to a very, very small percentage of the user base, which is an insane way to run a video game company to me. I feel like you want more players and you want more players to buy your game. I feel like that's pretty much traditionally how games were marketed and released, and you're trying to get game sales. Even so, I guess this monetization model is kind of puts you in this corner where you have to listen to what the whales are saying, or essentially if one of them leaves, you lose a percentage of your revenue, a non-negligible percentage of your revenue. So I still have lots of questions about, exactly how long this sort of revenue tail is. Okay, so if the top spenders spend X amount and there are this many of them, how many of people in our category are there, and do they, what's the total of revenue that they spend relative to the people in the top 10 category, let's say. So I'm still curious about those particular numbers, because for me, in my mind, that means that they do have to listen to either a select few, or that kind of the people they have to listen to kind of extends a little bit further down into the transition period between whale and dolphin territory. And I think that might be more the case in this game than a game like MSF, where, in MSF, it's the top 50 people are generating probably all of the revenue for that game, right?
Well, I mean, maybe, right? But I just want to preface that these numbers are from 2015, and obviously CG has much better data, right? This is just napkin math on a Friday evening or Sunday in this case, right? But I do want to it is worthwhile to understand that the scale is massive, even for you and I versus the very top versus you and I versus the free to play, right? So that is where it really becomes interesting. I would say that given that I'm now middle aged, or at least a little older than the most people playing this game probably. I know for a fact that my personality type works against me in this type of game, right? So that's also why I'm saying they have all our data. They know, AI is doing sentiment on a Discord, etc. There's no doubt in my mind, because it doesn't cost that much to do, and it gives you real-time data on how the community is perceiving you. So that I'm not too worried about, and that's also why I'm confused on the timeline for Marquee farming as an example, right? As I said, I posted these $200 per into Arvon and Elrond almost before he was bugged, but I'm not going to be doing that in the future, because they just told us don't do it, right? But that's $400 they're not getting a month. So and I'm not going to reinvest that money into other parts of the game, because I don't need to. Yeah. So from a commercial angle, they definitely need to create something, so whales can keep chasing the dragon if they want to boost the numbers, or they will have to acquire, again at an order of scale, new players that can keep the same amount of spend that we have been going through.
I think that's probably the strategy that they're going to take. And I just want to say for the record how I feel about this type of setup, and how I feel about... Okay, so I have spent probably, yes, similar to the amount of money that you spent, on the order of probably $2,000 to $3,000 in this game. This is the first game I have done that on. And I also feel like I shouldn't have a larger voice than people who don't spend on the game, or spend very little on the game. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, because people can be like, well, you're paying, so like you're paying customers, so shouldn't you have as much say? And kind of my take on it is that I think these games, although their revenue is completely dependent upon these very high, spenders, you also need a player base. And as we see, most of that player base is not spending money. I enjoy having free-to-play players to talk to strategize with. I actually think there's a lot of value in these types of games for free-to-play players, because they can go so hard on min-maxing and optimization. And I find that stuff very interesting. And I played a lot of games like this. I played Swigo specifically as like a very hardcore focused free-to-play player that wanted to try and do as best as I could in Grand Arena. And I think that's a really awesome way to play the game. And I think those people should have a share, be able to hear what views they have and what things would be good for the game for them. And so that's why I'm actually very much all for them having this release cadence for Marquees, because one, I don't have to spend the money, but two, like, this is just actually a very good way to keep those free-to-play players in a reasonable cadence for farming these characters.
Yeah, man, it is a fair point, and I mean, I oftentimes say on Discord, if free to play don't matter, right? And then of course that is exaggerated, right? Because I definitely appreciate them as human beings. It's just that from a commercial perspective, right? They're users, so and users generate nothing other than, you know, metrics in some sense, and maybe metrics are valuable, but you know, it's the dollars that pays the bills. But to your point, right? Of course, there's plenty of value as a community, right? And I don't actually think, again, you and I deserve a larger voice, even though we are part of this unholy alliance of small group of people that is basically keeping the game afloat. Because while we are opinionated, right, in a public sense, obviously it's not our baby. Right, so I mean, I walked away from my MSF account, which at the time I had purchased or spent $20,000 on. I walked away from that account, not because I didn't like the game, because I actually like MSF's basic gameplay loop. I enjoyed quite a bit, but simply because their support interactions were so poor. I simply said to myself, it was so superfluous what they were doing. I simply said, I don't want to support a company like that. So I actually put that game down specifically because their support was so poor. So that's why I said during the critique part, right, the communication needs to improve, because even though we enjoy the gameplay loop, right, I mean, it's silly to continue, and again that's another part where, again, my personality type works against me, because I'm basically either doing 110% or I'm doing 0%, right? I don't have an in between. I've come to realize that's been helpful in my career, but in a game like this, it does call into the, I guess the impulse control that I basically don't have at some point, right? So I think that is also worthwhile to know, and that's why I'm saying they have all our user data, they have all our profiles. I can guarantee you they have all these things already, right? I do in my business, so why wouldn't they? I don't even prey on consumers, right? I have a commercial business to take care of, so. So yeah, I think that's where it is, right? This is the dark side of the gaming industry as such. There is some dark emotional elements that they have to prey upon to. Well, they don't have to, but in some cases they choose to. But yeah, I think overall as a community, I think we are in a fairly good spot. Obviously, we have trolls going on, but yeah, if they fix the communication, I don't see why I wouldn't be playing this game in a year.
Okay. I think I want to reiterate your point, because you said it much better than I did, which is, these games are built around communities, either on Discord, in your guild. It's a very clear aspect of this game. And part of that is because there's a monetization avenue and route that they want to take there, which is you don't want to give up the game because you found this community, and therefore you might spend a little bit to keep up. But I think the community aspect is actually a massive part of why I play these games. And the community aspect can't be around if you don't have a significant player base of free or light spenders. And that is, I think, a very, very valuable piece of the puzzle, because I don't want to play this game if the people I've played this game with are no longer playing it. It's as simple as that. The reason I started playing this game was because an old guild that I played Swigo with was like we had people that were in there that were interested in playing this game. And now that is a guild that we formed, and we've kind of built up our own community out of that. And that is probably one of the top 3 factors for playing this game. So I think Torm and I are on the same page in this regard, in that we don't think the game is dying. We're pretty happy outside of the particular critiques that we mentioned. I think that basically all stem from communication issues. And I'm looking forward to what the next 6 months of this game bring, because I think they've got some stuff on the development table that's ready to kind of go, that's is going to be pretty exciting. So we'll obviously revisit this in the next podcast. Is there anything else, Torm, that you want to add at the end here? Any final thoughts?
No, I think we again managed to talk more than we probably should have. So thank you guys if you made it this far. I always appreciate the community, even though sometimes I can get a little pointy. But yeah, I consider myself fairly happy-go-lucky in that sense. So once I sleep on it, everything will be better. But yeah, definitely. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, of course. I'm gonna. I wonder if we actually got to 2 hours. We'll see when I hit the stop record button. I think we might have hit 2 hours. We'll see. This is going to be fun to edit down, I'll tell you that. But with that, that's probably all we're going to do talk about for today. If you did make it this far, like Torm mentioned, thank you so much for listening. People have showed an interest in these podcasts, so I think we are going to make them more of a regular thing. I don't think on a weekly basis, but definitely, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, depending on how much update stuff they do. I enjoy talking to Torm. We have, I think, very similar opinions on a lot of things, but differing opinions on other things. And I think we can talk to each other pretty well about that. And we're going to think about maybe bringing somebody else on every once in a while as well. We haven't quite discussed all that. But if you are interested in continuing to hear these types of things, please let us know down in the comments below. But also, if there's a particular topic that you want us to cover and go a little bit more in depth on, get our opinions on, we would, of course, either love to see that either in the comments, or you can bring it to the Discord, my Discord as well, and we can talk about it there, and then probably talk about it on the podcast if it becomes something that's kind of a big deal or big issue. And so with that, thank you so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Help grow the channel. Would really appreciate that. And till next time.